Watch for the cue. Oh, there it is. Okay. Good morning. Today is Thursday, March 10th. This is the morning session of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. And today we're resuming work on a number of fish and wildlife bills, as well as returning to weatherization. So we'll lead off with S-129, an act relating to the management of fish and wildlife. We had some committee discussion before and wanted to continue with that now. Senator Campion, your lead sponsor, do you want to
yes, thank you.
Speak to the bill?
Good morning, everyone. So just following up on my conversation with all of you and the chair, as well as the committee, I have drafted a letter. If it's the committee's wish, we can work on that letter a little bit tomorrow, a little bit on Tuesday if need be. Mr. Chair, I'll take the lead on this. Yeah, and get some requests to the commissioner so that we can find out more information and kind of learn a little bit during the summer, what steps we may need to take or may not need to take going forward. If you're comfortable with that, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Okay. And I think the committee seemed amenable to that. Let me just double check. Senator Weston, Senator McCormick.
I will send Ms. Newman that draft right now.
Okay, great. And then
we can, if you're comfortable with it, I can ask her to put it on the agenda.
Yeah.
For sometime in the next couple of days.
Okay, right. As a letter, it doesn't need to make crossover.
Right. So
taking that time pressure off right now is probably helpful to everyone. So wanted to check in with the commissioner on looking at that approach. We also wanted to hear from Mr. Medwig. So Commissioner, any thoughts on the letter from the committee way of working on this?
He's muted.
You're muted, Commissioner.
Oh, it's the same problem we had yesterday. He's not muted, he's just, yeah.
The lips were moving.
Right.
Hear me now?
Here we go.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. My computer has a mind of its own. So for the record, I'm Christopher Herrick, Commissioner of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I've testified regarding the bill itself and also in support of Senator Campion's approach. And so I think I don't need to take any more of your time to say the same things again. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Check in.
Thank you.
Things are evolving on a daily basis. Okay. Mr. Medwig, good morning. Thank you for coming back to the committee. What would you like to tell us about the Fish and Wildlife Order, S-129?
Oh, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to share my perspectives. I've prepared testimony and I'll run through that. Perhaps let me back up to say my name is Walter Medwid. I live in Derby. I come to the table as a private citizen. But I do hope that I can bring some perspectives from the wildlife profession, the larger circles of the wildlife world, that I think will provide useful context as you think about the issues in the bills before you. So with that.
Wait, just so you'll know, on S-129, even though we are talking about crafting a letter rather than moving the bill itself, the concerns you raised can be, we are still writing the letter. So it will be helpful for us to hear that your testimony anyway. I don't want you feeling as though it's not helpful, because the nature of the request, the items we put into the letter are still in development. So your testimony is on point and timely. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, my background and my biases. I possess undergraduate and graduate degrees in biology. My career has been in the not-for-profit sector. I've served as the executive director of several conservation organizations, including the Adirondack Mountain Club and the International Wolf Center based in Minnesota. My perspectives on wildlife have been informed through various wildlife encounters, including while climbing all Adirondack high peaks, 46 of them over 4,000 feet, my 4 trips to Ellesmere Island in Canada's high Arctic, including 2 trips with the federal government's chief wolf scientist, Dave Meach, where we lived with and studied a pack of Arctic wolves. And he'd been doing that for 18 years. I was also in Hinton, Alberta, Canada in 1995 to support the historic effort to translocate wolves that would restore the ecological integrity of Yellowstone in Idaho. I have since revisited Yellowstone about a half a dozen times to witness the ecological impacts of their return necessitated by an ugly and ill-informed campaign to eradicate all predators. The wolf's return has impacted elk numbers, they're down, beaver and bison are up. And if I may, just the return of the wolf to Yellowstone National Park has produced remarkable consequences. Elk behavior has changed. Elk have moved from the Lamar Valley and they have moved up. That habitat has restored. Birds that have not nested in the Lamar Valley are now nesting. Trees have recovered. Birds are nesting. Trout species that were having a challenge surviving are now finding cooler water because the vegetation in around those streams, instead of being decimated by elk, are now returning. As I said earlier, bison numbers, I should say, are up. Beaver number are up. There's been an incredible trophic cascade, as it's called, from the return of the one missing species in the Yellowstone ecosystem. I think we undervalue the consequences of an apex predator. I would also say this: never could you see a grizzly bear in Yellowstone 12 months a year. Today, you can see grizzly bears 12 months a year in Yellowstone. They are waking up from their deep sleeps in order to prey on the carcasses of elk primarily that the wolves have killed. I'll get back to my testimony, but I think there are stories about wildlife that we have yet to learn, and Yellowstone is a good example of a remarkable unfolding of knowledge.
Sure. I think I read an essay about the wolves in Yellowstone and the ecological impacts, and I'm blanking on the name, but it was a great piece of art.
The process is called trophic cascades, how one species can impact a full suite of other environmental factors. Yellowstone continues to be a living laboratory of learning. I'll continue with my experiences, if I may.
Yes, please.
I have been charged 3 times by a sow grizzly in the wilds of Denali National Park. I have been in the field studying black bears in northern Minnesota. Here in Vermont, near Lake Memphremagog, I've identified 148 avian species, plus another dozen from hikes to Mount Mansfield, Camel's Hump, Jay Peak, Mount Ellen, and the mountains surrounding Lake Willoughby. You will find no bigger advocate of the outdoors, wildlife of all types, and ecological processes than me. Collectively, those experiences and observation have influenced me greatly and convinced me that a consumptive-based and driven wildlife governance model lacks ecological integrity and excludes broad swaths of stakeholders, falls far short of where we need to be. Whatever you decide on these 3 bills, but especially 129, it is my sense that the revolution in our attitudes towards wildlife and its management must be part of your thinking. Perhaps my words won't convince you. However, I do hope you will take note of the key themes coming from the wildlife profession that I will share with you. I believe it is critical that you have the context of where leaders in the profession stand on the very issues you are facing. And I'll just mention 3 seminal papers, and I'll say a sentence about what they're about from their abstract. The first paper is entitled Governance Principles for Wildlife Conservation in the 21st Century. And here's, again, a blurb from the abstract. Wildlife conservation is losing ground in the United States for many reasons. To address this trend, agencies like the department must adapt to contemporary social, ecological conditions. And in this paper, we combine elements of public trust thinking and good governance to produce a broad set of wildlife governance principles. These principles represent guidance for ecologically and socially responsible wildlife conservation. Paper 2, a conservation institution for the 21st century, implications for state wildlife agencies. And again, from the abstract, the Wildlife Conservation Institution needs to reform to maintain legitimacy and relevancy in the 21st century. In this paper, we suggested an ideal institution would have the following 4 components: broad-based funding, trustee-based governance, multidisciplinary science, and involvement of diverse stakeholders and partners. And the last paper I will reference is a paper entitled Successful Wildlife Conservation Requires Good Governance. Again, from the abstract. State agencies in the United States, while tasked with conserving wildlife for all beneficiaries of the Wildlife Trust, have tended to manage for a limited range of benefits, in part due to a narrow funding model heavily dependent upon hunting, fishing, and trapping licensed buyers. To best meet the needs, interests, and concerns of a broader suite of beneficiaries, agencies will need to consider how priorities for management are set.
Mr. Medwick, quick
Yes, sir.
question. Have you sent us your written testimony, so we'll have those citations that we can chase down later?
I have not, but I will certainly do that.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on, I want to, this is a report. I don't know if you can see it. It's from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. They represent the interests of fish and wildlife agencies across the country. Vermont's department is a dues-paying member. They recognize the wildlife crisis. They also recognize the financial crisis departments are facing as license sales and revenues decline. They convene about 24 authors from across the country, experts, to decide what do we need to do. And they came up with 2 recommendations. One was on funding. And again, they're suggesting to tap into a federal source. But this is directly related to S129. In their report, they said, recommendation number 2, they said the following: every citizen has a stake in and benefits from healthy fish and wildlife, but most have little contact with or understanding of the state agency responsible for their stewardship. To remain relevant, agencies will need to transform their structures, such as the board, their operations, and cultures to meet the changing expectations of their customers. And let me move on to another recent publication. This is the November-December 2021 issue of the Wildlife Professional. It is the chief periodical going out to wildlife managers across the nation. It was devoted to one topic, and that was the changed landscape of attitudes towards wildlife and wildlife management. The issue was entitled Change. How should wildlifers respond to shifting public values? The opening paragraph by the Director of Wildlife Policy for the Wildlife Society wrote a column on adapt to survive. He said the following, and I quote, "I think one of the largest challenges facing our profession is our collective willingness and ability to adapt to observed shifts in public attitudes and perspectives on wildlife management and conservation, end quote. The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies recognizes how difficult it is for departments and structures to change. They are, like many bureaucracies, resistant to change, but they have developed a roadmap. They have spent years now developing aids for agencies to navigate. How do you go from an agency grounded in a fish and game club culture to a contemporary focus? And I want to read from the executive summary of a report put together by some 60 individuals from state, provincial, federal agencies, tribes, NGOs, natural resource and outdoor industries on this report. It also included the president of the Wildlife Management Institute, Steve Williams. And again, I'm going to cherry pick here, but they talked about the agency cultural barrier. They said agency culture and values do not align with nature-based values and outdoor interests of broader constituencies. Their strategy to fix that is to commit to recruit and retain diverse values and perspectives within the agency workforce. More specifically, they said we need to take 3 steps. 1, leadership at the department demonstrates support for a diverse and inclusive workforce. Number 2, change hiring practices to attract and recruit more diverse staff at all levels. Number 3, create an environment that is inclusive and supports diverse opinions and voices in decision-making at all levels. And again, if you'll bear with me, I want to read sort of the 5 key findings of this major, what's called relevancy roadmap. Number 1, agency leadership and governing bodies like the board must recognize the need for conservation agencies to adapt to changing societal conditions and demonstrate support for adaptation efforts. Without guidance and support from leadership, an agency is unlikely to undertake the type of adaptive changes needed in response to societal trends. Number 2, agency leadership and governing bodies need to demonstrate commitment to being more inclusive of diverse perspectives and interests in fish and wildlife, their habitats, and outdoor recreation activities. An agency's public trust responsibility extend to all members of current and future generations. Leaders must set the example and expectation that the agency will engage and serve broader constituencies. I think I won't read others as long as I will forward that to you. Let me say that the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies established an office to provide staff to reach out to individual departments to help departments figure out how they will navigate the whitewater that they find themselves in. And let me also say, one of the leading voices in these papers is Dr. Dan Decker from Cornell. He's a past president of the Wildlife Society. He's received their highest award, the Aldo Leopold Award. He's decided to take no more graduate students so that he can focus his energies on supporting departments wrestling with how to change from the current paradigm that they find themselves in. And let me focus on our department staff. We know from an internal survey, 85% agree that the views of the public are changing with regard to wildlife management. 85%. 63% indicate the agency is not doing enough to address change. This is from an internal survey. It was part of a national survey done through Colorado State University. The report is called America's Wildlife Values. Passing 129 would be a core step towards adapting to the course of calls for change. And in reality, change is anything but earth-shattering. It would bring the department to stand like other departments in Vermont's government that do not operate with a board responsible for some of their mandate. The Department of Health doesn't have a health board. The Agency of Transportation doesn't have a road and bridges board with people equipped with a license making the decisions about which road or bridge gets fixed. The Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation doesn't have a board responsible for carrying out some of its mandates. The existence of the Fish and Wildlife Board making regulatory, and this is downplayed, but it makes public policy on public assets that by Title 10 statutes must serve all citizens. Yet there is no representation from the larger stakeholder group that are part of that public asset. This erodes Vermont's governance model. The department staff do already represent license holders. 67.8 identify themselves as traditionalists. That is, wildlife is used and managed for human need, 67.8%. They are high on the domination orientation. Only 5% of the department staff identify as mutualists. That is, we must live with wildlife. 72% of the staff hunted in the year before the internal survey was done. 82% fished in the year before the survey was done. The department is staffed predominantly by traditionalists and license holders, and those interests will be protected with the passage of 129. And as an aside, Minnesota, for instance, does not have a wildlife board, but it does have 3,000 wolves, the largest population of wolves in the contiguous United States. Talk about controversy. But the department handles controversy as part of their day-to-day duties. Let's use that model here in Vermont. Why do we need a board? If we want science to be the basis of our decisions, why do we condone a process that turns science decisions over to a lay board? The department should be the agency to address all wildlife issues, not just some issues. Let the department stand like other Vermont departments. And realistically, the legislature has become the forum for addressing wildlife change. The board, by its makeup, is no longer a forum for addressing that change. And to get into the weeds for a moment, let's look at coyotes. It all comes down to coyotes, I think, in any conversation about wildlife. You have heard from officials at the department that coyotes are valued. They have educational programs are done about them, and the website offers that they bring ecological benefits. However, while taking that stand, the department also supports the current policy of allowing the killing of Vermont's apex predator 365 days and nights a year, a position that cannot be more antithetical to ecological principles. It is a de facto declaration of coyote as vermin, and it feeds a subculture of killing for the sake of killing. It is the ultimate wanton waste of wildlife. It is impossible to hold those two values at the same time, but it is exactly where the department stands. Vermont's wildlife governance infrastructure is disconnected from today's socio-ecological landscape. Take the time, please, to read the commentary in today's edition of Vermont Digger on wildlife. It is a plea for you to take action now. We cannot remain frozen in a time capsule from another era with a value system grounded in the 20th century. The executive branch has failed to lead on these issues. The legislative branch must fill that void. You must fill that void. The genie is long out of the bottle. In the wildlife profession circles, all of the decisions about this, where we need to head, have been made. It's no longer debatable. It is now about implementation. You can advance that implementation by passing 129. It be the catalyst that gets us out of the stuck place that we are in. And I'll conclude with this. This is another sentence from the Blue Ribbon Panel report. It states as follows: if state fish and wildlife agencies fail to adapt, their ability to manage fish and wildlife will be hindered and their public and political support compromised. Our political and public support is being compromised as we speak. And perhaps the greatest loss here is that Vermont now has 1,000 species that have been identified as species in greatest need of conservation. We need to come together. We need to fix the dilemma that we are in so that we can move forward together. The 1,000 species are under threat. We are compromising our ability to address those threats by being stuck in a paradigm from the last century. I thank you for your patience with my testimony. I will pull it together and forward the citations to you. And I'm happy to respond to any questions that you may have for me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murphy. Any committee questions for our guest this morning? Senator Campion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, and thank you. That's very helpful. I think that will, as we continue our work in this direction, I think you've given us a lot of resources to consider. Yes, I very much appreciate if you haven't forwarded everything you just said along, if you would do so, that would be terrific.
I will, Senator Campion.
Thanks, Mr. Maywood.
Again, I move, thank you for your testimony. I have a couple questions I'd like to ask. And one is, one of the characterizations of the current setup is that when you're going to ask a technical question about hunting, that you should be going to a board that's knowledgeable about hunting. I'm saying hunting, fishing, trapping. And that some of the other, so this perspective you're talking about isn't, I'll just say this is maybe a strong characterization of it, but I'd like to hear your response. That the perspective you're talking about isn't relevant to that proceeding because they're talking about technical conditions around hunting, fishing, trapping. And I think the analogy was you wouldn't have citizens come and participate in a meeting of the plumbing board that's actually designed to address the specifications to properly plumb a house or building. So I'm saying that's my perspective, but that's one way we hear the sort of the appropriateness of the current constitution of the board and its operational. And so I would just like to ask you to help, respond to that. And I think it's something everyone in this committee has heard at various points. What do you think when you hear that kind of a characterization?
Senator Bray, I sort of three levels occur to me, and I hope I'll remember the third by the time I finish the first. One, I think, as I mentioned in my testimony, the department, in the case of hunting, the majority of staff at the department hunt. So they bring expertise in and of themselves combined with a biological background. Number two, I would say getting input from the hunting community about a trap or some specific quota on game take doesn't require a board with public power abilities. They can serve in an advisory capacity to inform the department about what that constituency feels is the right way to decide about that particular issue. And again, the third thing that I would say is it is often said that the board only is a regulatory body. It determines, is it 6 fish that we take or 7 fish? We use this trap or that trap. It's antlerless deer or it's bucks only deer. But it's far more important than that. The board makes public policy over public assets that by law must serve all of the public as stated in Title 10. And it's part of the foundation of the public trust doctrine that wildlife is held for all of the public. And I think this committee cannot accept the fact that the board is simply regulatory. The board has established a policy to say, we will treat coyotes as vermin. That is public policy in the state of Vermont. You are not involved in that. The governor's not involved in that. The public is not involved in that, but that board established that public policy. That is where I think you need to examine the board in terms of this unelected body, largely uncredentialed body, representing a small slice of the constituency, is making public policy on fox, on river otter, on bobcat, on lynx. We have public policy that says prey is more important than predator. That is not supported by ecology. It's not supported by biology. It's not supported by science. Those are the issues that we need to overcome. And we can overcome that by holding the department accountable to serving a broad constituency and having an advisory board that may challenge decisions based on the knowledge that citizens can bring to the table. The Fish and Wildlife Board as it exists today is not that forum. I was there on June 16th to present a petition that was signed, including from Senator Vincent Luzzi, to say we need to adjust our policies on predators. There is no justification for how we treat them. And obviously that petition went down in flames. Any event, it's, as I think Senator McDonald said earlier in the week, these issues should not be coming to you. We need to have a functional wildlife governance system that addresses these issues, not you. No, and I mean no offense by that, but we've got to have a functioning system. I hope I've offered something.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. When you said the petition went down in flames, what is that? What happened? You present it and do you get a response that says we thank you for your testimony and you're done, or?
Oh, no. Senator Bray, the petition went in earlier in the year. The department researched, it was 11-page petition citing various scientific sources to say there is justification to examine our public policy on predators in particular. And so at the June meeting, the department, primarily Kim Royer, presented on behalf of the department. The department did not support the petition. The board voted unanimously to deny the 2 petitions within our 1 petition, if you will. There were 2 other petitions done, one by POW, one by the Vermont Wildlife Coalition. All 4 petitions went down in flames that evening. I would also add that if you may have recalled, 7 Days did their largest expose ever in the paper on, and they called it Wildlife Wars. In part, that expose was based on the reporter viewing on tape that meeting of the Fish and Wildlife Board. And again, it generated, sort of a public airing of, I would say, a wildlife governance model that no longer serves the citizenry. And I would argue no longer serves the resource itself.
So when this petition process happens, when you submit a petition, is the first step for them to agree to consider the matter? Is that, or in other words, did they decide we don't want to take it up, or they evaluate the petition, say, doesn't, for whatever reason, have enough merit to earn further discussion in the group?
My sense of the board is that they accept every petition that comes to their mailbox. I think the primary filter is the department. The department biologists review the pros and cons of the issue. The department often will make a recommendation about it, as they did on June 16th. And it was handled, I think, administratively in an appropriate sort of way. But let me also say, I think there is a sense in the committee that the only way the board can act is if there's a petition. The department submits proposals to the board routinely. The department could submit a proposal on coyotes, on trapping, on dog hounding, on bear hounding, on anything. So it's not just citizens. The department has the ability and acts on that ability routinely to submit proposals that are considered by the board.
And that, if I may, another follow-up. Senator Campbell, did you-
No, thank you. No, I'm good. Thank you.
So you were talking about how this structure, we know there's a much broader public. I don't really like these terms, but I guess they've stuck. The consumptive versus non-consumptive public. And so one concern, I'm just trying to figure out what is a better forum. In other words, should the Fish and Wildlife Board be reformulated in a way that non-consumptive Vermonters participate in that board? Or is there another forum that's not just the Fish and Wildlife Board that you would recommend as a way of engaging the many Vermonters who are non-consumptive members? I'm looking for a model, I think, of how that would work.
Senator Bray, my response to your question is to say, have the department stand as every other department in Vermont's government. Give it the responsibility. Do not divide the mandate between game and non-game. We need to think ecologically. The department should be thinking ecologically. The ecologist doesn't think about wildlife in two different camps. One is species that's taken versus species that are not taken. And again, I go back to the Minnesota model. They've got 3,000 wolves. They've got controversy. But the Department of Natural Resources, as it's called in Minnesota, functions. It works. It deals with controversy. It takes the disparate views of the citizenry and comes up with recommendations that serve the citizenry, not just a slice of the citizenry. So there's a model out there. To create a board removes the department from the front line of taking responsibility, using its expertise to deal with these issues. Why do we create a board? 50 years ago, when Governor Stelling was modernizing Vermont's government, boards were eliminated largely. And Vermont's government was professionalized, but we have an outlier. That outlier is the Fish and Wildlife Board. There was a committee on government operations that recommended the board be advisory only. But because of the political nature, I think there was a concern by the citizens that the department would not uphold consumptive values, and so that was retained by the board. So I would argue that keeping the board is a throwback to a failure to fully modernize Vermont's government with regard to this department. The department shouldn't be treated in a different way than other standing departments in Vermont's government. Why? Why do we treat it differently? I don't understand it.
Right. Senator McDonald, do you have a question? Okay. All right. Senator McCormick.
Thanks. But I want to apologize for my posture. I have a detached retina. I have to keep my face down. I think it looks like I'm asleep. It seems to me, and I don't know if I'm covering any new ground here. I just want to do it from a slightly different angle. It seems to me that in most political controversies, the controversy does not involve two conflicting answers to the same question. There's two different questions being addressed. The opponents of any changes to the board make the case that the board is already doing a good job at performing its mission, that mission being the management of game. And that why fix it if it's not broken? Why put a lot of people who are not hunters and fishermen on a board that determines hunting and fishing? It seems to me that the people who want to reconstitute the board actually want to change the board's mission, which is to deal with wildlife in its full dimensions, including as game, but also as various species with intrinsic value. And in terms of the human uses, there's the consumptive and non-consumptive uses. I appreciate the emails I've gotten from you. I apologize for not giving you the courtesy of a quick response to each one. We've got hundreds of emails. It's simply impossible to keep up. Am I correct in what I said, that really what you're talking about here is not so much reconstituting the board, which probably is doing a good job of its mission, but rather changing the mission of the board?
My response is we should change the mission of the board. We have a fully functional department with expertise. Why are we adding a layer to the decision-making process when the department already makes decisions on hundreds of non-game species? That same expertise can make hundreds of decisions on game species just as well without a board. We can set up an advisory board if technical expertise is needed. But the most important thing is that the public trust doctrine, Title 10, declares all wildlife a public asset, and that the public needs a voice in what happens to those public assets. And right now, the board is not reflective of the diversity of stakeholders that have a deep interest in how we live with, how we manage game species. I hope I've provided an adequate response, Senator.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that we've been more or less in that discussion all along. I just wanted to, I do know there are people out there who I think don't quite get that we're suggesting a changed mission. Because if we were happy with the mission the way it is, I think you can make a case that the board's doing a fine job.
And Senator, sorry, I would say, my apologies.
No, I added something on. I apologize. I'm done.
I would simply to say the jury is out as far as what the leadership in the wildlife profession, in the wildlife society, at the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, they have concluded that we need to broaden the voice. We cannot have equity unless a broader community is involved, not in a superficial way, but at the table. And currently, that's not happening. And I would say, again, if our current wildlife governance system is working, we would likely not have 4 bills before the legislature. We would not have the commentaries, including today's in Vermont Digger, pleading with you to be the catalyst for change. We cannot stay stuck in a time capsule. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Medwig. I wanted to just check back in with the commissioner and ask if we just heard a lot of testimony, asked a lot of questions. I don't know if you have anything you would like to contribute to that conversation as well.
I do actually. So one thing I'll note is the Fish and Wildlife Board has a narrow scope. And that is around hunting, fishing regulations and so forth. However, the implication that the department is not looking at the total ecology is not accurate. And so I can't let that stand. Secondly, I find it interesting that the comment was made, the petitions went down in flames, which is an inflammatory comment. They were voted down, but it was based on recommendations from the department. So the implication that the department would be hiding behind the board is clearly not true. The other thing I'll mention about the board is there have been some commentary about who they are. Well, we currently have on the board the former chair of the House Natural Resources Board, fairly enlightened, I would believe. We have the the dean of the Rubenstein School at the University of Vermont. These are well-educated. These are people who see the broad spectrum of what's going on in Vermont. And so it is important, and the department has been instructed by me to figure out ways to be more inclusive in the voice and what's going on. But yeah, I find it concerning that the board itself is there's an effort to remove it completely. And so I guess that's my response in short.
Sure. Well, thank you. Yeah, based on our conversations, I wanted to make sure you had time, because I know that we've had conversations about the department's mission around being a premier wildlife department in the country. So I wanted to make sure we got back to you on that piece. Like
I said, so what's confusing to me is the recommendation here, is the department, do we want the department to guide the policy, or do we want the department to run differently? I mean, the implication is that it's not working. What's the real question?
Senator Campion.
Petitions come to the board, and the department supports it with our biologists. That's already been stated. And so it's not like the board is out hanging off by itself, making wild decisions. They're basing their votes on a recommendation. I heard Kim Royer's presentation. I went back and looked at the video. It was comprehensive and it made sense. And the board decided, yeah, they're going to listen to the states. And you heard her. I believe you'd listen to her as well. She knows what she's talking about. So the fact that the board already listens to the department recommendations, I'm not sure if it's the board that is being identified here, or anyway. I think it is on our radar, and I've already indicated that we will be working regardless of what comes out of this, the letter, so forth, to find ways to have more dialogue with folks like Mr. Medwood and other folks to figure out how to be more inclusive.
Sure. And before we go on to Senator Campion, so let me just remind us all that I think we're always off on the wrong track when we start talking about individuals and how they might be behaving and their motives, et cetera. We really, I think we're all doing our best, and sometimes we're not always, none of us are perfect, to avoid getting into talking about people and personalities as opposed to the programs, the policies, et cetera. So I don't want anyone in the department or the board to feel impugned by the fact that we're asking questions. I think it's inevitable that it may be uncomfortable, but it's not personal. And I think I want to make sure that it's always a respectful and productive dialogue.
And I don't take it personally, and I don't And any of this discussion isn't, I'm actually asking what I believe to be questions. And I would like, before Senator Campion, I apologize, I would like to make one other observation. The fact that there were people advocating for bills here, and then saying because there are bills here, that's an indication that we need to have change, is kind of a self-fulfilling argument, a circular argument in my mind.
Senator Campion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think the conversation that we're having right now is one of the reasons I'm not comfortable moving S129 as is. This is, I think we're illustrating why, some time, a letter, getting some more information. And I also want to recognize that the commissioner just became the commissioner. This is new leadership. This is, however some may have felt about the past is the past, and there's new leadership. And I want to make sure we give the commissioner the room to breathe and the room to exercise the way he's going to lead the department. So I just want to make those comments.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. Okay. Any other committee comments or questions? I also see that Ms. Gessing is here. I don't know if she's into sort of.
Senator, I just asked Catherine, who is the general counsel, to be in the wings in case there was testimony earlier talking about the board process. I don't think it's necessary, but if you wanted to have a very detailed explanation of the process, Catherine is the person. So I asked her to join us.
All right,
It's up, but whether you need that is up to you.
thank you for that, and thanks, Ms. Gessing, for joining us. I don't know that there's any more detailed questions, but I think we all like to have a, the dial a friend button ready, so you can tap into expertise from others. So, are there any committee questions for Ms. Gessing on process? Okay, so thank you.
Nice job, Catherine.
Yeah, knock it out of the park.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, I think we don't have any more testimony scheduled on it, and we do have a letter that Senator Campion has drafted, and it's posted on our website. So I think rather than try to do a definitive edit as a group, which is, I think, outlawed by the some sort of treaty on cruel behavior, where we won't do a group edit, a live group edit on the draft letter, but that draft letter is posted so that, and I'll ask you to send it directly to you, Commissioner, so that you have it, and then we will edit as a group and move the letter forward. But because it's not under the same time clock as crossover, it will probably put it on a slower track than the other bill work we're doing. Okay, so with that, we are a little ahead of schedule. I think it's 5 of 10, and I think we'll pause here for the moment on 129 and return at 10:15 on 281, an act relating to hunting coyotes with dogs. So unless anyone has any closing comments, questions, remarks, we'll take a pause for the next 20 minutes till 10:15 and pick back up on 281.